Once I started, I couldn't stop. The voices wouldn't let me. What could have happened inside the home of a seemingly ordinary family that left 6 people dead in their beds? There was no signs of a struggle, and no one heard anything. The man who confessed said that the house told him to do it. It was well known to friends and neighbors that the family that occupied this house had more problems than the typical family. So who did it? Was it the mafia? Was it a solo killing spree? Or was it the unimaginable? A demon? The case is always described as open or closed. And every time I hear that, I'm like, is it really though? Because if it was really that simple, why would people still be arguing about it? Why did he say he didn't just snap? Why did he say that the house told him to do it? And then you have the people who lived there later talking about hearing things inside the house. That's the part that makes me stop and go, I wonder. Okay, something doesn't sit just right. I'm your host, Nikki Nightmare. This is a series where we look at cases that are supposedly explained, but somehow they don't make any sense. This program examines real cases. Then there's everything that was never really quite explained. Here we break down what was proven, what was claimed, and what people still can't agree on. Tonight we begin with the case that started it all. Once I started, I couldn't stop. The voices wouldn't let me. These words would later be used by Ronald DeFeo Jr., other known as Butch, to explain why 6 members of his family were found shot dead in their beds. He didn't say he was angry. He didn't say it was an accident. He said that the house told him to do it. Before we go any further, it's important to understand what this house was before it became infamous, because nothing about what comes next makes any sense without this context. And one detail from this family dynamic will later appear in the crime scene itself. Big Ronnie, aka Ronald Joseph DeFeo Sr., married Louise DeFeo, also known as formerly Brigante, on November 3rd, 1931. Their oldest child, Ronald Butch DeFeo Jr., was born on September 26, 1951. Butch had a bit of a rough childhood as he was overweight pretty much throughout his time in school, early school, middle school, into high school. This caused him to be picked on all throughout his high school years. Eventually, Butch thinned out, mostly because of his use of amphetamines, but this did cause a lot of problems for Butch DeFeo. It tended to weigh heavily on his psyche and on his personality. It was known that Butch was often in physical arguments with his father, with one witness stating an incident where Big Ronnie had pushed Butch into a wall so hard that Butch had hit his head on the wall. Big Ronnie often expected a lot more from Butch, mostly because he was the eldest son. Butch was later known to family friends as kind of the black sheep of the family. They actually explained him as a bit creepy and kind of like a Charles Manson type. They stated that Butch was always lurking around and kind of being a creeper. Several years later, Butch was getting a sister, Dawn DeFeo. And later in 1961, another daughter, Allison, was born. On September 4th, 1962, Mark DeFeo was born. At this time, Louise had attempted to leave Big Ronnie for reasons unknown, but Big Ronnie somehow managed to sucker Louise right back on in, and in 1965, Big Ronnie and Louise were blessed with a 4th child, John. Big Ronnie would borrow money from Louise's father, Michael Brigante Sr., in order to have family portraits done. And can you believe that those family portraits filled those pockets to the tune of around $50,000? That's quite a bit of money for some family portraits. It was known that Big Ronnie controlled the household financially and emotionally. Many relatives and associates described him as authoritarian, verbally abusive, and prone to explosive bouts of anger. He controlled the family finances, including the wages of his adult son, Butch DeFeo. He often used this money as leverage during conflicts with Butch. But this story is not just about the money. It was about who was allowed to leave. The police were called on at least 2 occasions for domestic disturbances, yet no charges were ever filed. While no reports confirm any documented physical abuse by Louise DeFeo or towards any of the younger children, emotional intimidation and fear were described as commonplace. Louise DeFeo was described as emotionally withdrawn and overwhelmed. Friends stated that she attempted to mediate conflict but was largely unsuccessful. Relatives later described emotional neglect likely stemming from fear, exhaustion, and submission to her husband's authority. authority. But Ronald Butch DeFeo occupied the most volatile role in the family. He showed documented behavioral problems throughout high school and even into his later adolescence. This included suspension from school for violent behavior and drug use. Reports suggest that Butch DeFeo had a tendency to use multiple narcotic substances, to include heroin, LSD, barbiturates, amphetamines, and alcohol. Butch worked for his father at the local car dealership. It is believed that Ronnie Butch DeFeo was deliberately underpaid and financially controlled by Big Ronnie. Arguments over money were frequent and escalating. Family members testified that these confrontations were amongst the most tense in the household. Witnesses explained that on one occasion, Butch had pulled out a 12-gauge shotgun and pointed it at Big Ronnie. Butch threatened to kill him. There was another occasion where Butch had staged a false robbery at the car dealership. At this time, Butch embezzled $20,000 from the car dealership. Big Ronnie confronted Butch Ronald DeFeo, and the shotgun was the result. Now, Dawn DeFeo, she was 18 at the time of her death. She was widely described as strong-willed, outspoken, and increasingly defiant. Unlike her younger siblings, Dawn openly challenged her father's authority. Dawn had expressed intentions to move out. At the time, Dawn had a boyfriend named William Davidge. I'm probably saying that wrong. Sorry, y'all. And it was known that she wanted to run away with him to move to Florida. But Luis and Big Ron flat out refused. Dawn frequently intervened during violent arguments between Butch and Big Ronnie. This positioned her as both an ally and a threat. Later, Dawn would become the most contested figure in this entire case. Relatives described Dawn and Butch's relationship as volatile, alternating between closeness and hostility. Please note that these claims were not part of the original investigation, and that timing matters. Over time, rumors developed of a sexual relationship between Dawn and Butch through a book that was published through Hans Holzer, which was called The Murder in Amityville. But note that these allegations originated solely from Ronald Butch DeFeo years after his conviction. There's been no physical evidence, no third-party witnesses, and no official reports. Psychiatrists later noted that these claims had shifted over time and also undermined credibility. The three youngest children were described as quiet and withdrawn. They avoided confrontations by staying in their rooms during arguments. Now, I ask that you please remember the role of Dawn DeFeo because this does become important later. Now, this is what investigators didn't expect. They expected chaos, signs of a panic, signs of resistance. And what they found instead was silence. Now, it's important to note, before it was publicly associated with voices or demons, this house functioned as a pressure cooker, emotionally, psychologically, and according to later claims, spiritually. Arguments echoed through the hallways. Silence followed outbursts. Some relatives later described the home as feeling heavy, not haunted, not cursed, but oppressive, a description that would later take on a new meaning after the murders. This distinction matters. In the early morning hours of November 13th, 1974, Ronald Butch DeFeo Jr. entered his home in the middle of the night and shot all 6 of his family members while they were asleep in their beds. Each one was found face down. None showed defensive wounds. Investigators had questioned whether the victims were asleep, whether they were sedated, or were they conditioned by fear. This was never resolved. As you listen, keep track of the details that stand out to you. Different people noticed different things throughout this case. Butch ran into a local bar called Henry's Bar and shouted, "Help me, help me. I think my parents have been shot." Now, this bar was located a few blocks away from the home on Ocean Avenue. It's important to note that this home is located at 112 Ocean Avenue, Long Island, New York. Butch fell to his knees, crying, just completely overwhelmed. His best friend, Bobby Kelsky, I think that's how you pronounce it, Joey Yeswit, John Altieri, William Scormaglia, I think that's how I pronounce it. There's a lot of names in here I'm struggling with. And Al Saxton ran to the home located at 112 Ocean Avenue, burst open the door. The door was not locked. The family dog Shaggy was chained in the kitchen, barking. Upstairs, they found a horrifically gruesome scene. Big Ron and his wife, Louise, had been shot, and they were laying face down in their bed with bullet wounds to their backs. Down the hallway a little bit further, another gruesome discovery. All the children had been also shot in their beds. Further details from the autopsies revealed that some of the family members may have had sedative-type substances in their bodies. Later, witnesses would describe Butch DeFeo's demeanor as alternating between frantic and strangely calm. Police did come to the house and discovered all 6 bodies, and all of them had been shot in the back with a 35 caliber Marlin rifle. This rifle was owned by none other than Butch DeFeo. There was no forced entry, no signs of a struggle, and no neighbors heard anything. No gunshots, nothing. That's where this story gets very interesting. Investigators couldn't determine intent or timing in this case. Hold on to this detail, as it was never fully explained. Butch had made claims at this point that possibly it was a mafia hit. His father had dealings through the car dealership with the mafia. So the police put Butch under protective custody. Now note the details of the house. 112 Ocean Avenue was a large 3-floor Dutch colonial that was built in 1925. The yard was very narrow, so instead of the house being turned facing the street for the front door, the house was actually settled sideways with the front door facing their neighbor. In the back of the house, there was a giant boathouse, which, was quite a wonderful commodity at the time. In the front yard, there was a lamppost and a statue of Saint Joseph holding baby Jesus. In front of that was the sign of High Hopes. This is what Big Ronnie decided to name the house. This house was located right on the edge of the Amityville Creek. The interior of the DeFeo home was just as impressive as the outside of the home. Inside, it featured a formal dining room that was decorated in red, a marble-covered foyer, velvet texture-lined wallpaper, with a ginormous dining table that could fit easily a family of 6. This dining table had a beautiful crystal chandelier dangling above it. Across from the dining room, there was a living room. This living room contained a beautiful piano. It was clear from this house that the DeFeos lived a pretty extravagant lifestyle. The police went to the bar to pick up Butch. They brought him back to the home. Butch repeatedly explained that he was not going back into that house. He was slamming his hands on the car hood. He was freaking out. Eventually, the police were able to coerce Butch to go back into the house. Butch had denied any knowledge of knowing about the murders. This is when he claimed that the family had ties to the mob. On November 14th, Butch caved. He confessed to the murders. Now, it is important to know that Butch gave multiple different stories about why he committed the murders, how the murders were committed, and he continued to give different accounts of the murders and how they happened up until the day that he died. Some of the versions were that Dawn and Butch had done this together, that Dawn had killed the children and Butch had killed the parents. But after Butch had found out that Dawn killed the children, Butch got angry, fought Dawn over the rifle, and accidentally went off and he shot Dawn. Another account was that Butch had killed the entire family in a complete drug haze, and that a dark figure had approached him in a hood, and that this dark figure had handed him the rifle and told him to go commit these murders. Another one was that Satan himself made him do it. Another story was that Louise had killed the children. Then Dawn killed Louise, and then Butch killed Dawn. There were so many different accounts. On October 14th, Butch attended trial and he pled that he was insane. This is when he explained that voices told him from inside the house to kill his family. It was also proven in court that Butch had antisocial personality disorder, but that did not mean that he was insane to the eyes of the court. He was still held responsible for the murders. So here we are. Investigators had a confession. They had the weapon, but they had a lot of unanswered questions. There was no forced entry. There was no signs of a struggle. And Butch's story just kept changing. Hence why we never really got the answer, even after the trial, about what really happened inside the home of 112 Ocean Avenue. Now remember that Butch's story didn't change just once. As we stated, it changed multiple times. And each version raised more questions than the last version. Every version seemed to contradict the other. Now remember that the whole reason that Dawn being involved was rejected was because ballistics showed no evidence of multiple shooters. Dawn's body had showed no signs of a recent struggle. Her position in the bed contradicted any active participation, and this timeline was implausible. Courts dismissed this claim. So now, if the voices that were telling him to kill his family weren't his, whose were they? He had originally described just voices. It was just voices that told him to kill his family. Not thoughts, not impulses, but external commands. coming from somewhere in the house. He told him that the voices spoke to him at night, only when the house was quiet. These voices were short, direct, and emotionless. They didn't threaten Butch, they instructed him. According to Butch, the voices were telling him that his family was against him, that they were plotting to harm him. They were also plotting to control him and take what belonged to him. During this time, he didn't name the voices. They weren't described as inherently evil. They were described as authoritative. Is that even a word? I think it is. As time passed, when they were in court, this is where the voices became something else. Butch's descriptions began to change in court. The voices no longer just heard, they were felt internally, emotionally. He described a presence in the house, moving from room to room, lingering in hallways, and always watching. He claimed at this time that the presence originated inside the house, not in his mind. That distinction mattered to him. At first, they were instruction. Later, they had intent, and eventually, a name. Years after his conviction, DeFeo began to describe the voices as fully demonic. Remember that on November 21st, Butch was found guilty of all 6 counts of murder. He was sentenced to 6 consecutive sentences of 25 years to life. He was never going to see the light of day again. He was transferred from the court to Sullivan Correctional Facility, which was a maximum security prison in New York. Up until his death, all of his parole requests were denied. Now, the stories of demons telling him to kill him, it would make sense, wouldn't it? How could a rifle go off 6 times in the middle of the night and nobody heard anything? The neighbors didn't hear anything. I mean, when he killed the mom and dad first, that's 2 shots at least. The rest of the family should have heard. Does it make any sense? That's where the question comes in. How? How is it possible? Now, another story was that Dawn herself was an avid user of LSD and other drugs. Is it possible that she and Butch had conspired to kill the family? Sure, it is. It's believed that Dawn would wear dark hoods. So maybe while Butch was all crazed out in his drug hazes, did Dawn maybe go up to him in her dark hood, hand him a rifle and say, kill the family? That's possible. Maybe Butch sobered up and realized what was going on. Maybe he couldn't go through with the plan as Dawn went around killing everybody and then he killed Dawn. But that still wouldn't make any sense with how her body was found in the bed. It just doesn't line up. So years after his conviction, Butch explained the voices as 100% demonic. Not symbolic, not metaphorically, non-human. He claimed that this entity had spoken to him from the walls, from the floors, and from the space above him as he slept in the house. He described an overwhelming pressure, a sensation of being surrounded, cornered, and directed. He claimed that the more that he tried to resist the voices, the louder the voices grew. He said the only way to make them stop was full submission. Butch no longer framed himself as acting in the house. He framed himself as acting for the house. He claimed that the house demanded blood, that the murders weren't personal, but required by the house. He said that the house didn't want any witnesses, only silence. Across all versions of the stories, one detail remained consistent. Butch insisted that the voices were not his own. What changed was their identity. Now, why do these demonic claims matter? If Butch was lying, the escalation would have served a purpose. He believed what he was saying. Evolution suggests he struggled to understand it. And if the house was only a structure, then why did the story keep returning to it? Added this demonic entity and the belief that the house itself was alive, aware and watching him. As you know, in 1975, the jury rejected DeFeo's insanity plea. If the house was only a backdrop, the story would have ended in court. It didn't. Before this ends, return to the details that you have been asked to remember. The control of money, Dawn stepping into the conflicts, sedatives without explanation, a house where no one heard anything. Individually, none of these details prove what happened. Together, they explain why this case was never truly closed and why some believe the house may have been more than just a backdrop. Butch DeFeo died on March 12, 2021, at the age of 69. He never reported a final consistent account of what actually happened that dreadful night at 112 Ocean Avenue. Unfortunately, Dawn DeFeo left no statements. Her story only exists through evidence and through the words of the person who killed her. Those words changed. The house remains. The murders ended. The blood was cleaned. The house was silent. But silence is not the same as empty. 1 year later, a new family crossed the threshold. They knew what had happened at the house. What they didn't know was that something in the house had been waiting. Next week, the Lutz family and the presence they say revealed itself after the doors closed.